I've noticed that many foreigners have around 2.5 feet of personal space, while Americans tend to cherish a bit more room. Make sure to maintain a distance of at least 2 to 3 feet when talking to strangers. I once had an Italian man get so close, I thought he might kiss me. It was really uncomfortable, especially if you're not accustomed to such close proximity. Avoid engaging with police officers unless it's absolutely necessary. It greatly depends on your destination, but don't assume the price you see is the final cost. Sales tax is often not included in the listed prices, and tips are expected in restaurants. Smoking inside public buildings is illegal, so don't do it. Additionally, don't light up inside someone's house, apartment, or condo without asking for permission. While it may not be illegal, it is certainly very rude. If you're heading to more remote places, like Montana where I live, don't underestimate how rural it can be. Small towns might not have hotels, and many areas lack accommodations altogether. You could drive for miles without finding a gas station. Also, if you're on a dirt road, many in rural US areas, don't expect reliable cell service or GPS. The road might end in the middle of nowhere, leaving you stranded. This can be hard to imagine if you're used to busy areas. It's best to plan ahead and read reviews. Visiting wilderness areas is incredibly rewarding, which is why I live here, but it presents a different kind of risk than city travel. When ordering a large size at a restaurant or especially at a movie theater, keep in mind that no matter how hungry you feel, you likely won't finish it in one sitting. I once visited a bar in Russia where the bartender told me he wanted to visit the US and go to Alabama because of the song Sweet Home Alabama. That was the only time anyone mentioned wanting to go to Alabama, so my advice to foreigners would be to skip it. Gary, Indiana, do not go there under any circumstances. If there's trash on the ground or around the establishment, other safety or hygiene rules might also be ignored. If the floors aren't clean, the whole place probably isn't. I know this may sound elitist, but coming from a background of poverty, I can confidently say it's true. Always ask the locals about their favorite places to eat. They know the best spots, far better than any travel blog could tell you. If a sign says no trespassing, don't ignore it. Leave any preconceived notions about America behind. It's an incredibly diverse country, and your experience in one region will likely differ significantly from another. Stay open-minded and enjoy the adventure. Don't expect the US to be walkable. While some of our larger cities are, even they don't compare to European cities. In most areas, driving is necessary. New York City is really the only major city that's the exception, though even there, public transit isn't as efficient as in many European or East Asian cities. If you're visiting, you should plan on renting a car if you don't have other travel options. If you're going to hike in the desert, remember to bring plenty of water due to the intense heat. Driving from New York to Los Angeles. We once had a French exchange student staying with us in New York. One day, she was looking at a US map and mentioned she was planning to take a bus to California because she'd seen so much about it on TV. We had to explain that it would take her a week, each way. Another time, a German friend flew into Texas and thought they could make a day trip to Los Angeles. After that, they planned their travels better, visiting different US regions and giving themselves more time to explore. If you're going to Alaska, don't visit isolated areas on your own, especially if you're inexperienced. Alaska has the highest missing person rate in the US, with about 168 missing people per 100,000 residents, around 730,916 people as of 2023. Most of the state is remote, unexplored wilderness. There's even a region known as the Alaskan Triangle, where many people vanish, along with missing aircraft, strange sightings, and more. If it's your first time in Alaska, I recommend staying in South Central Alaska, where Anchorage and the Mat-Su Valley offer many tourist activities. For something more adventurous, consider whale watching or glacier tours in Seward or Homer. If you want to go further inland, you can drive for 2 hours to Talkeetna or 6 more hours to Fairbanks. Avoid looking disoriented or unprepared in high-crime areas of big cities. Dress practically, maintain a sense of confidence, and stay alert. People with a sense of direction are less likely to be targeted than those who appear lost. Don't try to bring marijuana across state lines. It's not legal everywhere. If you're pulled over by the police, do not exit the vehicle. Keep your seatbelt on, hands visible, and move slowly. Be polite, especially if you are of darker skin. Honestly, most of the bad areas will be fairly obvious to anyone with basic decency and common sense. However, I would still recommend avoiding Texas. In the US, it's quite common for strangers to greet you. In many places, people will ask, "How are you doing?" But it's not really a question, just a polite greeting. How you're treated can depend on where you're from. Certain parts of the country can be particularly unfriendly towards specific nationalities. Coming to the US as a European will likely be a very different experience compared to someone from the Middle East, Africa, or Asia. Avoid making sweeping generalizations about the US. It's essentially 50 separate states, each offering its own culture, landscape, and climate. Anyone who says otherwise probably hasn't traveled much. In general, you should tip at sit-down restaurants where a server takes your order, brings food, refills drinks, and clears your plates. A standard tip is 15%, though most people I know tip closer to 20%. Don't ignore local warnings about weather. If the locals are concerned, you should be too. Do not attempt to bribe police officers. No matter how corrupt American law enforcement might seem, bribery is never an option, unless you're wealthy or influential. Avoid walking around alone late at night, particularly if you're a woman. I have friends from Korea who are used to feeling safe walking at 1 a.m. But when they visit the US, I always have to remind them that it's much riskier here, especially in cities like LA. The US is enormous, and distances are far greater than most Europeans expect. A flight from London to New York is only about an hour longer than a flight from New York to Seattle. In large cities like New York, Boston, Seattle, Las Vegas, and Houston, avoid interacting with people offering free CDs or other items. They'll often try to charge you once they've got your attention. At national parks, don't try to take selfies with wildlife. A full-grown bison could throw you across the field like a piece of paper. There are park rangers who are dedicated to protecting both the parks and visitors. Listen to their advice. Every year, several people die in the Grand Canyon National Park, usually tourists who fail to realize how dangerous the terrain and weather can be. The same goes for Big Bend National Park in Texas. Try to avoid going to the hospital unless absolutely necessary. Whatever the estimated cost is, it's likely to be higher. A person from my country had a stroke in the US, and it cost over $150,000 in medical expenses. Medical travel insurance is essential if you're visiting. Hollywood Boulevard isn't all it's cracked up to be. I once warned my cousins, who were visiting from Oklahoma with young kids, that it wasn't a great place for families. They didn't listen, and later their mother said, "I should have listened to you, it was terrible." When visiting the US, it's best to avoid sensitive topics like politics and religion with strangers, even if they bring it up. Be mindful of local customs as they can vary significantly. And don't forget to tip in restaurants. It's a common custom. Skip the big chain restaurants and try smaller local spots instead. You'll often find some hidden gems. Food trucks are also a great choice. Anyone wearing a MAGA hat?